Hey guys, and welcome. Buckle up for a new episode of the Dental Plug Podcast, the one and only podcast made for dental administrators. Whether you work at the front desk as a receptionist, or the treatment coordinator, a manager, all three, a dental hygienist, or every role in between, you're sure to pick up tidbits of actionable advice when you listen to the Dental Plug Podcast, your source for the top persuasion, influence, and negotiation techniques that will help you become a top leader that will maximize your success in life and in the dental business. Welcome, welcome. So, I wanted to start things off with giving you guys exposure to a conundrum I recently had with the insurance called Humana. I'm sure that most of you that handle the insurance aspect of the office, like sending claims, posting payments, and working the accounts receivables list, have countless stories and information about the culture of this plan. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. So, in this particular office, I was responsible for sending out the claims, posting payments, also working the accounts receivable for claims that weren't paid for whatever reason. So I happened to come across an unpaid procedure due to an overpayment request or payment reversal for another patient. I go to the account of the patient they're requesting the overpayment for. Now, I've come across a couple of reasons for overpayment requests. If you've never come across one, it's basically when the insurance plan determines the requested payment amount should have never been made. I've come across a couple of reasons for overpayment requests. Reasons as like patient was ineligible at the time of service. Another reason is patient has two insurances and the plan requesting the overpayment determines the primary paid that portion. The other one that I've seen also is the insurance consultant, which is the person that reviews the x-rays and supporting documents sent with claims, concludes that the procedure doesn't meet the plan guidelines or criteria. So when I go to the patient's account, I see that the actual claim is outstanding. So at this point, I decide to call the insurance because for me, there's nothing more definite than a call to the insurance, despite the fact that there may be a long wait time. The IVR is helpful, but I know it's not going to give me the final results I need. So I try to bypass the prompts and stuff as much as possible to get a rep. Now, I do want to mention that there are some insurances that set it up where it'll hang up on you if you don't provide the information they're requesting. For those types of calls, right, insurances, I give the information they're requesting and I wait for the prompt to request a representative. At the time of this recording, Humana does not have their phone system set up in a way that it hangs up on you. So you can essentially bypass it and then it'll say, please hold until until we transfer you to a representative of sorts. So I requested for the representative, and seconds later, I get one. So I provide information and ask questions listed on my insurance call sheet. I start with my introduction. Hi, my name is Kayla, and I'm calling from Best Dental, calling for claim status. I immediately get the rep name and a reference number for the call. Those are the first things that I do, especially the rep name and the reference number, and I'll explain why further along. I provide the information required to validate the office, such as the tax ID, the office address, the phone number, and also the provider name. Usually, the provider name should be the provider on the claim because eventually they'll ask you again. So, might as well not even say the owner. There's different dynamics to different offices, obviously, but always say the provider on the claim. Then I provide the patient information, which is subscriber ID, patient date of birth, the date of service, the billed amount of the claim. Now, this rep was not helpful. I would ask questions. The rep will put me on hold 4 to 5 minutes at a time. The rep had a way of saying things in a way that was kind of like roundabout. Like when a lot of words come out, but in the end, they're not saying much. So finally, I learned the claim was paid, but our office sent a letter stating that it wasn't our patient. So I'm like, no, that's impossible because this is our patient since 2017. I'm looking at the ledger. So I asked for the date, the letter was sent. I get a brief silence. Then the rep repeats the same thing. The reason for the overpayment is because the office sent a letter stating that this is not your patient. So I asked her, I said, do you understand what I'm asking? And then just silence. She was silent for the remainder of the call. I kept asking questions. I kept saying, hello, are you there? But I kept hearing the background. So after like a couple of seconds of that, almost a minute, I had no choice but to hang up and call again. I literally lost 35 minutes of my life, guys. The only thing you cannot get back in life is time. So I call again. I provide all the information I collected from the last call, even mentioning the last rep and her actions. I go right into it. I don't waste any time. I'm not here to waste my time, right? So right into it. So I said, why were our payments being sent to another office? That rep didn't answer the question specifically, but said that from January 2022 to June 2022, all EOBs and payments were being sent to another office. So after a little bit of putting me on hold and coming back, the rep finally says that I need to be transferred to what's called the Provider's Payment Integrity Department. I ask if there is a direct number for this department, which there is. I'll actually provide the number to the Provider's Payment Integrity Department and also the provider relations number as well. I'll leave that in the description box, of course. So I get transferred to the Provider's Payment Integrity Department. I once again give my intro, request name, and reference number. I follow up with providing the information of both previous calls. The rep confirms a payment was made, but a letter was sent from the office stating this is not our patient. So that's when I dig further and I ask the following. I asked, when was the claim paid? What is the check number? What is the issue date? What is the amount paid? And paid to who? That's when the rep says the office name and address, but it didn't match the office. It was mailed to another office. So all of this is happening because essentially the claims, the EOBs, not the claims, the EOBs and the payments were being sent by Humana to another office. The rep also has a roundabout way of speaking in circles, so I request to speak to a supervisor. I was placed on hold for over about 35 minutes. The rep never checked back, letting me know, there was a wait, nor was there like a callback so as far as I'm concerned, I'm on hold. So I don't want to hang up because I'm like, oh my God, I've invested, and I'm looking at the time and I'm like, okay, that's 20 minutes on hold. I'm like, I already invested this time. I don't want to just hang up. And then, all of a sudden she comes back on. So after 35 minutes of never checking back, never calling me back, I decide to hang up. So I call again. But this time, remember, I call to the provider's integrity department. I'm not calling the claims department. So I go right into it. I repeat everything we already know, but this time I sound overbearing, right? I mention all the rep names that I spoke to, how they handled the calls, and I immediately request for a supervisor. At this point, I'm definitely sounding critical. And once I'm critical, once I'm there, once I cross that border, that line, I basically just get down to it. I say, listen, you have a job to do. I do as well. Our office is in service of treating patients for their dental needs. Some of these patients have Humana. You and your peers, as reps for this company, have the responsibility to help offices like mine when we have questions regarding a patient under your policy. So I would like to know if you are in the position to help me. I would like to know if you're able and willing to help me or not. So once you hit them with things like that, you basically read them their rights. You know, his energy was definitely different after that. He wanted to look into it as well before transferring me because he wanted to help with anything possible. That's when I was told it was cashed. I also mentioned the letter. The rep says your office sent a letter stating that that's not your patient, which is the reason for the overpayment request. I'm like, we didn't receive the payment or the EOB, so how could we send a letter? I can tell he had a light bulb moment. He kind of apologized. I mean, because he wasn't thinking, he was just like reading off the script, right? So after digging further, I'm asking, like, why was the check sent to another office? He says there was an address change request. I ask from who and to fax over the letter to me because I need proof that the office actually sent over a request for an address change. He placed me on hold. He came back and said he couldn't find the letter, naturally, right? So I tell him, I said, do me a favor and look at the claim we sent you, and if you can kindly read the address on the claim. He reads our address. So I asked, I said, why would we request, you know, to change our address, but the claims has our previous but yet current address on it? I didn't even let him reply. I said, what seems to me after all of this, that Humana made a mistake and started sending EOBs and payments to this particular office and can't even catch the fact that the office receiving the payment sent a letter, but still sent a letter stating that that's not, their patient, but still cashed the checks. Does that sound about right? So he had no choice but to agree and stay on the phone with me to transfer me directly to a supervisor. As I was waiting for the supervisor, I generated an accounts receivable. I generated the accounts receivable list and noticed there were 19 outstanding claims with the time frame of January, within the time frame of January and June. So I was ready. Like by the time the supervisor came on, I already knew, what was going on. So my call with the supervisor was more fast paced, as you could imagine, because they're more seasoned and, they're a supervisor. They're up there, if that makes sense. Not all the way, but they're better than representatives. So I learned that out of the 19 claims, 16 were made payable to the office and were cashed. The supervisor faxed over all the EOBs to me and went into the system to start the overpayment request to the other office for the 16 checks that were cashed, then requested the 16 claims to be paid to her office, as well as reverse the overpayment request for the one patient I called in the first place. So throughout the call, I provided the supervisor with rep names, reference numbers, and the context of each of the call. He was able to see that what I was saying was truthful because he would check. He would log in the reference numbers and confirm the name that I stated and confirm the summary of the call that said rep left, right? So at the same time, I'm actually showing my authority in the sense that I'm not here to lie. I'm not here to waste my time. Like I'm giving you reference numbers and names and stuff that coincide with what I'm saying, right? So because I'm also packaging it up in a concise summary, it just seemed like a lot that I went through a lot to find out the information about an overpayment request. So it took me 5 conversations to get this going. And it was a complete nightmare until the end where, the supervisor was able to help me. So the takeaways of today's episode. Takeaway number 1, always collect name and reference numbers before getting into the details of an account. Takeaway number 2, if a rep is unable to provide a reference number before getting into an account, highlight the reference number on the insurance call cheat sheet so that you don't forget. Takeaway number 3, if it's the type of insurance that does not provide reference numbers, create your own using rep name, the date, and the time. Takeaway number 4, if you find yourself speaking to multiple reps, always give a summary of everything from the previous calls. Takeaway number 5, some of you may feel bad for complaining, but let me tell you that when you do, always let them know that you're doing it so that they can have educational moments and retrain the reps. This helps them help us. You're only improving the quality of the future calls for your and other offices. Takeaway number 6, know the pecking order. Do not be afraid to complain and ask for a supervisor. Insurances are obligated to serve the offices and their members. If we don't exist, they don't have a job. Takeaway number 7, when complaining to a supervisor, always provide the names and reference numbers you've collected. Takeaway number 8, always control the call. Takeaway number 9, always be curious and ask questions. This way you'll always learn the insurance behavior, patterns, and trends. Well, that's all for today's episode of the Dental Plug podcast. Thanks for listening. Join us again next week to take a front row seat in your space where we can support each other and talk about the topics that matter to us. Becky Moore will be stopping by and you're not going to want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. Plus, if you haven't already, check out the show notes for links to your free downloads and additional resources. Bye for now.